when you speak to a lot of young black people, particularly from Caribbean parents,
right,
or Central American parents,
right,
but particularly from Caribbean, you see this paradigm shift, if you may, or there's this line where these kids that come out of parents that are Caribbean, they're African American, versus these kids that comes out of predominantly African American, pure African American parents. The kids that are coming out from Caribbean parents, apparently, certain studies have shown have done much better because of the nurturing, the kind of Caribbean discipline that they get at home. Not entirely as an educator, I can tell you. I've seen a lot of kids that comes out of Caribbean parents that have failed, that have fell through the cracks, right?
Absolutely.
We have those.
Absolutely.
But there's this large thing that, and I think it has been used as a divide and conquer strategy by the status quo, which is predominantly white, right? To say that they could do it, you could do it too.
Right.
What is it? You're complaining about slavery.
Right.
And then there's these Caribbean parents who push this knowledge. Oh, where I come from, there was no slavery there.
Right.
And we confuse
You tangle the web of blackness
the whole this whole concept and this whole making a lot of things difficult for a lot of people like you who are coming in to try to sort of solve these problems, to sort of bring new answers, new ideas to this whole thing. I think we need to have a clearer picture that it doesn't matter, if it is this or that, is that there is a problem.
Right.
There is a main problem.
But even so, I do think that it's incredibly important never to... I think it's committing academic and policy-making laziness to do away with the solution because you have to fit it in a case-by-case basis. Right? I think sometimes we make policies that are at times very convenient for us and sometimes not for the result. And we have to be very, very nuanced and meticulous about because to be fair, black doesn't exist in this one vacuum. There's a problem that exists for all black people, absolutely. But the way in which those problems are handled is vastly, clearly different depending on your background and these sorts of things. So for instance, right, the one thing that we kept mentioning was family, right? So a lot of these Caribbean families, they'll migrate and they'll raise their families and they'll institute these values. But there's a static family element that's involved there that doesn't exist in a lot of these African American spaces. So now you have Caribbean parents that are coming from these places. They don't teach them that it's not that we had more opportunity. What we were taught from a Caribbean family? We were taught how to capitalize on opportunities. That's not necessarily the same as being given the same resources. I may have had a greater probability, right? But my probability was not made up solely because of my parents coming in there. That would be naive. So that's something that I want to make very clear. And I think
we have the same values that coming from predominantly African American parents, comes from the South, has instilled. And you look at the movie Raisin in the Sun, you see these values still. I still see them. I have black families who I teach their children, and you can still see these values. So it's not like you're saying. It's like, where's the point?
Right. Because I think there are so many things that, and I wish I had the time to delve into each individual, whether it's the crack epidemic, whether it's districting that's done and less resources being given to certain schools. There's so many different layers to this issue, right? Whether it's property districting, whether it's weak education policy in certain areas, all of these things, they all contribute to the issue. But again, the one thing that I think we can do a better job of as a community in doing is preserving our families. I think it's very key, and I think that isn't to lessen the importance or undermine the importance of any of those other things. I think just for me personally, I found conviction in that.
And would you add also to that, with the preservation of the family, what Du Bois said, that the measure of progress in which we will make as a black people in this country is the measure in which we teach our children to what? Think for themselves. That's what he said.
Absolutely.
But Booker T disagreed with him.
Most people disagree with Booker T now. So, right. Because God forbid we all just ended up becoming technical workers, and that was that.
Apart from the building back that family structure, because they're attacking the family structure.
Right.
But also to teach that child to develop your own thinking.
Right. But it's difficult when, you know, as a child, your first teachers are your parents.
Yes. Right?
And when you have parents that aren't, or that haven't even experienced that for themselves and don't know what that looks like, right? It's difficult to put that charge on these parents to teach their kids. They don't know what they're teaching them.
Yeah.
And then these kids end up in spaces where they're further disenfranchised because their school's resources are pretty much non-existent.
Right? How do you teach a child to think for themselves? How do you do it? How?
Man.
That's, you know, Du Bois said that thing, but it's like, how?
Right. And more importantly,
yeah.
like, you know, I hear Du Bois, but at the same token, should a child have to teach himself?
Yeah.
Right? That's a privilege that exists for our white counterparts that doesn't exist for our black counterparts.
Yes.
Right? There's a charge in these communities that you have to be able to recognize that there's an issue. You have to recognize that you have to take charge of that issue and succeed. There's that thing that's always taught in black families that you have to work 10 times harder than somebody else that doesn't look like you. And there's a reason for that. So you know, it's unfortunate how layered it is. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic and I'm dedicated because, you know, not only am I as passionate as I am about creating solutions for this, but I'm surrounded by people that are all invested in this. And you got to take it a day at a time. It's a battle.
I mean, how do you really define what is an underserved community? From Aaron Francis's standpoint of someone who is challenging and bending a lot of these philosophies and these things that we thought was correct.
I mean, you know, underserved is it's a word that we use very often, and I think is like it could use some defining.
You're working in an area right now. You're volunteering as an underserved community.
Right. And that's a reflection of a community that I'm familiar with. Right. So, like, you know, it's a see it and understand sort of experience. Right. Like the communities that I've been in that I know are clearly underserved, and that I know where opportunity isn't equal across the board. And all it takes is a 15-minute drive in another direction for opportunity to the disparity between opportunity.
Yeah. Why do you do that there when you could go do
that
somewhere
exactly.
else?
Then like you start to realize and you start to ask yourself these questions. Like I remember thinking, man, like, you know, a couple of the kids that I went to high school, because I was very fortunate in that I was able to go to a private high school, and that changed my trajectory entirely, I would say. But, you know, you drive 15 minutes out, 30 minutes out from these sorts of spaces, and before you know it, you're in areas and you're like, well, they don't look like they have any of the issues that exist in public schools in our area. Then you start to ask yourself, okay, well, why are students not able to go to those schools instead of the ones in their own neighborhoods? Then you get into conversations like districting. Then you hear stories about how parents are trying to sneak their kids into other districts by lying about their address, and then their parents are getting in trouble and getting locked up in jail because they're lying on government documents about where their child lives, and so that they can go to a better school. You know, so like there's a constant force that's making it more difficult. You know, and that's a conversation then we get into about property values and why somebody can't move from one property to another. And before you know it, you're like, oh, okay. So there's this theory that you know, has been developed. I can't recall the scholar that developed it right now, but it's this caged bird theory, and it's this idea that, you know, there are all the bars of that bird cage represent some layered issue, right? And, you know, you can focus on that bird cage from one angle. You can take apart that one. You can spend your entire lifetime working on that one bar, and that bird will still not be free, right? So what you end up having to do is look around, find people, be invested in the solution, the breaking down of all of those bars, one at a time, and you start to see progress from there. I can't recall the term that we use it, but it's sort of like assimilation back into society for survivors and their ability to, one, maintain relationships and build new relationships. And there's the domestic violence element of it. So I tackle it from two standpoints. I should probably start with that. I tackle it from a sort of advocacy level where I'm just like making sure that, you know, like I'm talking to survivors, I'm talking to them and talking them through their experiences and then just being supportive generally. The other capacity in which I serve is sort of like an outreach sort of social leader paradigm shifter sort of thing, right? I one of the things that I did when I was in college, and something that I've like stayed with now, is creating conversations and dialogues in college spaces so that we can have honest and real dialogue about what is taking place on our campuses, particularly as it pertains to sexual assault and relationships between male and females. And what I try to do is challenge individuals, particularly males, to take a greater role in this conversation. So I charge them with, you know, not shutting down when, you know, their opinion isn't you know, considered seriously. And at the same token, I'm also challenging women to be understanding that, you know, these guys are telling things as they actually are. Like it's like on college campuses, the dating culture is, you know, everybody drinks on a Saturday, you know, somebody hooks up with somebody, before you know it, like any one of those times, like there's a gray line between what was considered rape and what was not considered rape. You know, we can get into that conversation. But at the end of the day, just being able to put those two demographics in a space and have them have a real and honest dialogue, that allows for just a much realer assessment of our society and our culture, and whether or not we want to persist in that direction. Because right now, I'd venture to say that our dating culture is not a healthy one. I'm not going to. It isn't a healthy one.
But Aaron, in terms of your line of work, in terms of your volunteer work that you're doing, when you say that you help a lot of these women to look at the men that have hurt them, not to be scared of them, that means that you have to begin to start doing some gang intervention strategies.
Of course, absolutely.
Because that's some of the whole gang culture.
Right. So one of the things that we're...
And then you look at it also and you says, well, do you, as Aaron Francis, say, as a social worker inside of that environment, playing that role of a social worker, do you say you perpetuate that as a female? Because apparently the new culture today that you have carved out is that you like men who looks like thugs.
Right.
These are the same men that you're saying you're scared of. The today young 15, 16, 17-year-old girl, black female, these whole looks, and not the Aaron Francis's looks, but the Rasta hairdo and the, you know, but even, anybody would see someone like that in the dark would be scared of them.
But even so, I do want to make it clear, like this, I think this touches also back on the conversation. So I agree with you. I never look at an individual and I never think thug based off solely appearance. Like that's something that I've done away with, just because I think for me personally, like I've met people that people would presume are thugs in Harvard University, in those spaces, in those classes. I have people that literally like have those dreads, have that accent, will not give it up, will stay true to everything that they believe in, and enter those classes.
It's a stereotype.
Exactly. But to be fair, so I'm focused on the behavior. I'm not focused on the appearance. So when I'm talking about behaviors, and you're right, like I do see a trend in, you know, like women being attracted to, you know, the dominant male figures and dominant. I guess you have to redefine what dominant is, right? So one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is having outreach to boys and young boys at that, and helping them understand that they can redefine conceptions of masculinity and success just in general. Because
Aaron, the rites of passage thing is all missing in the black community, black young men. Because
I want to make it clear,
the whole African tradition of being the African American, African this. There's no rites of passage. They don't even know what it's like to be men.
I don't know if I agree. I think there is, but it's jaded, and it's not something that we should value. Because don't get me wrong, like there's rites of passage in gang life, right? It may not be things that we agree with. It may not be things that we like
going out and shooting somebody that you don't even know.
Completely irrational, completely you know, they aren't values that we believe in, but they are values that they have grown up. You have to understand, like these are people that have been primed a certain way, right? So priming is a very difficult conversation, because you know, people are raised a certain way, so that makes entering into their lives and trying to have a meaningful impact very difficult. So what we try to do is use relatability as an approach, right? So me being a young black male from South Central makes it a lot easier for me as a Harvard Law School student to then reconnect with my black male youth in this area. Yes. But what I'm trying to do again, because I don't think it's wrong for women to be attracted to a dominant male.
Yes.
Right? I think that's something that is like, that's natural. That's almost nature.
And it's probably African in its whole perspective. If we go back and look at the African traditions, maybe it's
so. What's important isn't that we change. Like it's important that we have those hold accountable and help the redefining of what dominant looks like in those spaces. But we can't keep defining dominant as like people that are doing killings or gang members or these sorts of things. Dominant has to be redefined as this person is on top of whatever they're doing. They are trying to succeed. They are trying to make something of themselves. That needs to be the redefining of it. You know, I went to Morehouse as well. I've had these experiences, and you know, the problem at this level seems actually to be that there aren't enough black men available for the amount of black women that are in these spaces.
Or because they're all locked up in prison? Do you believe that theory?
I don't. There's actually stats that show that, you know, the black men are not as like there's this like faulty stat that's been going around about how more black men are in prison than there are in college. That's just not true.
And that's most of the black men are behind bars.
Right. Exactly. Now, is there still an injustice being done? Is like I think the prison population nationally is like 15%, and like black people make up like 4% of the entire population, I think, like, or something crazy along those lines. So it's definitely still a problem. Like mass incarceration is a very real thing. Like, and that ranges from people getting locked up from stupid things like, you know, actual drug possession to, like I mentioned to you, the parent that was trying to get their kid into a better high school, and now they're getting locked up because they lied on doctors. So like, there's a ton.
As someone who's carving out to be a lawyer, do you believe that theory that the sentences does not match the crime that they do?
I think it has less to do with sentencing. I do think that's an important part, but I think it has a lot to do with, you know, conversations that involve like this thing called prosecutorial discretion, these sorts of things, right? So prosecutors have the discretion to choose what cases they want to choose. And if a prosecutor is trying to stay employed, he's going to try to get the cases that he can win. So there are all these, they're operating off of implicit biases. They know that black people are seen as traditionally more violent than others.
And the whole connection to the prison industrial complex, there's slavery is all over again, and they're making money for corporations.
Right. So these are all things that have, you know, pretty solid ground in terms of support. Now, is it a very, so, and this is the thing, right? So, and this is how fascinating our sort of current system of systemic oppression is, right? Because you have to bring together so many different elements of this society to really see how much of a problem things are. Like I said, like the general arc. So like, let's use that cage bird analogy, right? So what tends to happen with people that don't want to believe that argument is that they will focus on one bar in that cage. Yeah. Right? So for my white counterparts that are like, you know, you guys are being ridiculous. What they're doing is, and it's still logical and it's still legitimate. So it makes, like, it's reasonable, it's rational. So like, it's something that will garner support. But all they're doing is looking at every bar by itself individually. They're not taking a step back and look at the entire cage. Because to be honest, they don't have to do that. Yeah. Right? That's a privilege in and of, like I said, like I'm so big on the concept of privilege. Like I think privilege manifests itself in the simplest of ways that sometimes we just take for granted, right? Like my being in a classroom, like being a law school student, being aware of all of these issues, knowing that I'm still intelligent, knowing that I'm still able to have these conversations. I have to also think about the opportunities during class where we're having conversations about things that are really pressing to my community specifically. And my job, my responsibility is to introduce my perspective on that issue. So I have an extra burden when I'm in class. Yeah. I'm not going to get tested on that burden, but I have to introduce it in class because I'm going to be expected to have that conversation because I represent black people when I'm in class. Right? So the fact that when I'm studying, when I have my book open and I'm reading a case, and I'm looking through a case that has racial undertones, and I have to read the case for what it says, then start over and read it for all the racial things that I know are implicitly being stated. So that's the reason why things are as problematic as they are. And yeah, man, it's you know, it's tough. you know, I want to continue to harp on the point that I don't, you know, this isn't an easy problem.
Indeed.
I don't see it as being a reason why I can't still personally succeed.
Exactly.
Don't get me wrong.
Exactly.
But am I going to go and have a conversation? Like, I'm going to do whatever in my power to help other people see that they can succeed. But am I going to look at somebody else and say, you have no reason to feel like you can't succeed? That would be a lie.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Very much.
So, yeah.
You definitely argue that point very, very well. Tell us presently about your academic status in terms of Harvard, and where do you want to go after you're done with law school. I think I've read into your piece that you may want to enter politics.
Yeah, so just so, and this, I don't know if this is going to be included or not, but I'll just make it sure, I'll make it known. Like, I'm actually really reluctant to be mentioned anything regarding like my interest in like a Senate seat or like something like that, because just from like the eye gets put on me very quickly. Yeah, but just service to your community.
Right, I mean, you have to step it up at one level.
So just to be honest, right now, given how many sacrifices I've made to even get to where I'm at, I'll be at Harvard Law School and their public policy school, so it'll be a joint degree program. I will graduate in 2018, and then I've already sort of essentially accepted a job. We'll figure that out. But from the looks of things right now, that'll be the job that I hope to maintain after I graduate at a law firm in New York. What I want to do is probably head back to California at about 30-ish, maybe like early 30-ish, and start building the groundwork. And regardless, like at every point of the way, like as I've done for the past 7 years, I stay involved with my domestic violence nonprofit. I still do programming with them, and it's only getting bigger and better as it stands right now. So yeah, that's the foreseen future, and I want to use my opportunity at my law firm to like just master something that I love, just as a profession.
We looked at you, and the reason why we celebrated the story so much in Belize, and we was sent to the #1 newspaper in the country, in Manila, and they published it, and people saw that. There is this big hope in Belizean governments that banking on their diaspora, and they're beginning to start to map the power of their diaspora. I mean, people like your mom and your dad are what you call skills in the diaspora. But you who are a child from Belizean parents, you are automatically a Belizean citizen. I don't know if you know that. You are automatically a Belizean citizen. And we would hope to see maybe one day, hey, you serve as an ambassador or something in terms of having, the question I was trying to get at is that, how do you see giving back to these two beautiful parents that you had that nurtured you? Right. Like when I spoke with your mom tonight, she said that you want to do this for dad. Yeah. Your father was a very, very, the word is not brilliant, but he was a very common sense guy.
Yeah.
He was a very common sense guy. Yeah, he was not a man of no big fancy words. He was just a guy that if he's going to solve the problem, you're going to get the simplest answer and solve that problem from him. How I knew him. I mean, you would never thought about that answer. Everybody would be thinking about, he would just come and say, hey, it's done. Problem solved. Right? So, very simple man that came up, basically, and I know you want to do this for him. And he had promised me that he would have been here with you tonight to sit by you. But how would you want to give back in terms of parent and country? In the respect of these two beautiful Belizean parents that raised you, nurtured you, and let you be the Aaron Francis that you are today with this very sharp intellect. How do you wish to give back? Or it's not something that you have looked at yet?
No, I mean, I don't think I've spent so much time working to, I think, one, like make them proud.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. So in terms of like touching down to the roots, like it's something like I've thought about, like like in passing, this is awkward because my mother's right there, but one thing that I'd actually be really invested in, and just from hearing their stories, and what I know of their upbringings, and I don't know how long this would take, but I would really love the opportunity to fund students from Belize who had potential that they were not able to fully realize
because they didn't have the resources and they didn't have the opportunities available to them immediately, and from their education to wherever they wanted to go in the United States, period, and for however long, and just establish that bridge and create a heavier pipeline for Belizean academics and Belizean policymakers and Belizean doctors and all of these things, and hopefully create opportunities for people to help uplift Belize in its entirety. That would be incredible, and then name it after my father.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Even Francis, it was a pleasure talking to you, and we wish you the best in all your endeavors, and we're going to measure those years, 2018, and we're going to look forward. But Belizeans are watching you, and you are out there. You're out there in Belize, and you're here, and we have high hopes for you. We want the best for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.